Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope my wellness warriors are doing amazing today. Hoping it's a beautiful day. We've had a lot of rain. I saw a little peak of sunshine yesterday afternoon and super excited to maybe see a little bit more of it today. In any case, I'm sorry I'm a little late. Facebook has this new thing it does where when I'm getting ready to go live, sometimes by the time I get done setting up my caption, for you, all of a sudden my face is larger than live and my live camera is way zoomed in, and I haven't tried to go live like that. Nobody wants their face that big, let's face it. So here I am, and if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, give me a hashtag replay in the comments, ask a question, drop a comment, whatever, just to let me know you saw this. If you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a jazzerciser, line dancer, runner. I own an activewear boutique, which is why sometimes I have crazy cool tanks and stuff on. If you want to know more about that, shoot me a message or drop a comment and we'll chat. But that's not what today's about. In any case, I am also a grad student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. And with that comes a disclaimer. I am not a licensed individual yet. Wellness Wednesday is designed to share kind of pure wisdom, if you will, which really, really works. And pure wisdom is the reason that support groups work so well. So not here to diagnose, not here to label, most of the time here to encourage against that. Good morning, Miss Carla. But just here to share information from my own journey of learning, from my own journey with anxiety and depression, things that I've done, because sometimes when we hear what other people have done that have worked, maybe we come up with ideas we haven't tried yet. Something sounds intriguing and it prompts or inspires a desire to start working a little bit more into it. If you've been following my page for a while, last week's video took a lighter side. And talked about great family movies for the summer because summer's almost over. School's going to be starting again soon. We talked about some great family movies with wellness messages based on what I've been watching with my grandkids over the summer. But today we are going to dig back into mindset, which is a lot of the basis of wellness in general. We talk a little bit about food. We talk a little bit about exercise, and those things are important. But a lot of times wellness boils down to mindset. And working on ourselves, which means today's a great day to dig into one of the latest buzzwords, which is shadow work. What is it? Good morning, Miss Victoria. What is shadow work? What does it even mean? We're going to talk about it. And I hope you find this helpful in some way, shape, or form. The good news is there's a spoiler alert here. If you are watching this video regularly and reflecting on any of the things you learn, either from me or from people who comment, anything like that, and you're applying anything that you've learned to yourself, you are already doing the shadow work. Okay, so let's get started. What is shadow work? What is it? It is kind of a buzzword right now, but it's not a new concept. It just has a new, different name. Essentially, it is the why behind our maladaptive behaviors and doing the things that we know are not helpful, like snapping back, overreacting, things like that. That is actually the reason I'm in school. That's what prompted me to, one of the biggest things that prompted me to go back to school. So my first love, when I went to high school, and I'm aging myself here, when I went to high school, Carla, something I did was funny, but there's a delay, so I'm not sure what it was. Probably the face I made. In any case, when I was in high school, psychology was actually a full semester long. That means I think it was 18 weeks. So if we wanted to take psychology and sociology as electives, we took a whole year. And half of that school year, I know, long time ago, half of that school year was psychology and half of that school year was sociology. And by the time my daughter hit high school, psychology was literally half of a marking period, which was 4.5 weeks. So totally different experience. In any case, my first love was psychology, and I didn't really realize that. I mean, I loved the class so many things about it. I have so many strong memories from that class and from the things I learned. But it wasn't until the construction downturn that began to affect my job back in it didn't circle back around to my job because I was more on the administrative side until about 2012 when I had to go part-time, that I was like, I need to go back to school, because at that point in time, anything that all the experience that I had in running a not-for-profit organization that I'd learned from the ground up basically was irrelevant, for lack of a better way to put it, because every job opportunity out there that used to say, the X degree or experience equivalent no longer had that experience equivalent anymore. They wanted that piece of paper plus the experience. So when the downturn happened and I was cut to part-time temporarily work, I went to college. I was like, okay, I need to not have all my eggs in one basket, which is a lesson I've never forgotten and will try never to do again. And I started with a human services degree and quickly rediscovered psychology as my first love. So changed my major. And then, after I finished my bachelor's degree, I went back to work full time for a while, but couldn't shake that calling, that pull to move into a helping profession. And so here I am. I'm a grad school student, but, when we talk about that why behind shadow work, and that why we behave the way we do, that is what has always fascinated me, especially about myself. And that is why, that is the why behind why I'm in school. But in terms of shadow work, it's that inner work, it's that mindset work, and me being in grad school counts. It's that inner mindset work, pick a phrase, whatever you want to call it, that drives to find out what drives our behaviors, especially the ones we know are not helpful, if that makes sense. So Carl Jung was one of the founding fathers of psychology. He started out as a student under Sigmund Freud. I know there's a lot of different schools of thought on Sigmund Freud nowadays, even for me. But Carl Jung described the repressed parts of ourselves that we find unpleasant or that we don't want to acknowledge as shadows. And that's kind of where this term comes from. According to a WebMD article, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we go, and then I'm going to drop the link in the comments. According to a WebMD article, shadow work boils down to addressing the things you're not supposed to be, or your shadows are the things you're not supposed to be, or more importantly, the things you think you're not supposed to be. Which that can start a rabbit trail of reflection to kingdom come. So it's honest inner work asking, why did I overreact? Why do I feel the need to be control? Some of these are examples. Why do I get defensive when someone gives me feedback? And what am I pretending isn't bothering me when it really is, and it's affecting my behavior? So I hope this is helping to kind of give you a visual picture. Shadow work boils down to noticing maladaptive or negative patterns. And even in my profile, I talk about helping people break negative thought patterns, because that's what I've been working on, and asking, where did this come from? But when we ask that question, we ask it with curiosity in the interest of learning, and maybe coming to a place of acceptance versus judgment. A lot of times when we start out very judgmental. We're like, why did I do this? I shouldn't be doing this. And that's not shadow work. That's judging ourselves and basically tearing ourselves down. So examples of shadows, if you will, are people pleasing, which is a shadow of a fear of rejection. Guilty. Rage, shadow of being silenced too often. Now, rage is a tricky subject with me. I don't experience a lot of it. I have to be pushed pretty far to reach the point of rage. I have had a couple moments, but it's been a very long time. But what happens with me is when I get aggravated about constantly being dismissed or interrupted or silenced, my voice gets louder. I get louder and I start speaking over people. And that's something I've worked very hard on to try not to do. But it also equates to getting defensive when I get feedback, because then when I start getting louder, people are like, well, you don't have to be so defensive. And then I get mad because I'm accused of being defensive. And that's when I get defensive. So these are all examples of shadows. Perfectionism often is a shadow of the fear of not being loved unconditionally, of having to be perfect in order to be loved or appreciated. Jealousy is often a shadow of low self-worth. There's a lot of different schools of thought behind that. We could do a whole separate thing on jealousy. We're not going to go there. But a lot of times jealousy is a shadow of low self-worth. It's us projecting our own low self-worth on situations. And I have been guilty of that too. In fact, that's one of my flags that I am going backwards into that negative thought loop, is when I start displaying jealousy, always being called critical or negative Nelly. Yes, Carla. So these are sometimes flags that we have shadows that are creeping out, projecting on other things or other people. So defensiveness is often I had another note here. Another example is we tend to have strong reactions to other people who demonstrate the same shadow traits. And this can look like a couple of different ways, either because we don't want to be associated with those traits. We see them reflected in us. We don't want to be associated with those traits. Or we resent the fact that these people can express that side of them when we don't feel like we can. Notice I said when we don't feel like we can, not when we can't, because generally it's a story we tell ourselves. You guys have heard me talk about this before if you're a regular follower. It's a story we tell ourselves that we can't be like that, or we can't show that side of us. And I have an example here that might surprise some of you. So in the process of being in grad school, one of the things about college textbooks right now is there's a very huge emphasis on internal biases. And that's a rabbit trail I'm not going to go down with you today, because I have a lot of different mixed feelings about that. Some of them are defensive. But there are a couple things I've learned in the process of this, is that I have a couple of strange biases that I've been living with my whole life, some of which had kind of started to correct themselves, but are correcting themselves more now that I'm aware of them. And that's the crux of shadow work, is becoming aware of it and the whys, and how you can correct it if you choose to, or accept it if that's a part, as part of you and part of the reason you are how you are today. So interestingly enough, my business is all about, I love to empower people. And my business, my online activewear business, is all about empowering women. I mean, we have a beautiful men's line too, but it's really about empowering women. And I get a special sort of gratification out of when my customers, when my friends contact me and they're like, wow, I feel so good in this outfit. I love the way it fits. I love the way it makes me feel. I feel so good. It warms my heart so much to have been a part of helping them to feel that way. And that is the truth. And you've heard me tell the story about the woman who tore herself down in front of me while she was being fitted, and how heartbreaking that was, and how it made me realize what it looked like when I did it in front of loved ones. But here's the truth. At some point when I was younger, I became biased against women. And that's hard to admit. This is probably the first time I've admitted it to anyone besides my boyfriend, or maybe in a discussion post in class. At some point when I was younger, partly due to the culture, my cultural upbringing, the general social, cultural things going on at the time, I began to view femininity, not women, femininity as weak. And so I went out of my way, subconsciously, a lot of the times, to avoid being feminine. Clearly, I'm a girl. I'm wearing makeup. I often have my nails done. But I often strove, and still find myself striving, to kind of be anti-feminine, to be strong, to be able to do the things that men can do. And this is probably politically relevant now too, but I don't want to go political on this. What I've learned about myself is that when I roll my eyes at pink new releases in my online boutique, that is some of that shadow coming through, where I'm like, I don't want to wear pink. Pink is girly. I don't want to be like that. So that's a big admission for me, but it's something that's an internal bias, and there's a lot of reasons behind it. And I had to start a trigger journal in one of my classes to kind of start to flesh that out. And I learned about a couple other traits of mine too, because of the way I grew up, growing up fairly poor, financially speaking. I have some biases against having money. And those things, good, bad, or indifferent, will sometimes interfere with our personal progress in a lot of different ways. So, that's what I mean when I'm talking about shadow traits, either because we don't want to be associated with them, or we resent the fact that other people can show that side or express that side of themselves when we don't feel like we can. Defensiveness is often a huge clue that a shadow is about to be revealed. And there are other cues or inner dialogue during which that can kind of flag us, and other cues or inner dialogue we need to pay attention to, and that's an emotion or an action that's in a reaction, or an inner dialogue that we have going on while yes, a trigger journal, Miss Carla. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the inner dialogue that's going on when we're having a strong emotion or reaction, the feelings that are associated with those thoughts, and the bodily sensations that are associated with those things. So that is kind of, by way of my elbow, an explanation and a personal example of shadows and what shadow work is going to entail. So here's what shadow work isn't. And I want to make sure I get this disclaimer out there. Good morning, Miss Kayla. Shadow work is not, and our shadows are not, an excuse for bad behavior, or, and this is really important because you guys know how I feel about this if you follow me regularly, it is also not an opportunity to tear yourself down. Shadow work, finding awareness in those shadow traits, is not about, it's not about, ooh, this is wrong with you, you need to fix it, what is wrong with you? It's not about that judgment, it's not about that labeling, it's about that, okay, here's this thing, and I'm not sure I'm happy with it, but it's part of me. Why? Why do I feel this way? What is the reasoning behind it? And how can I fully integrate that into myself in a way that I can accept? So it is not an excuse for bad behavior, or it is not, and I have an example there too. And Kayla knows this story. So I'll talk about that in a minute. It's not an opportunity to tear ourselves down. It's not an excuse for bad behavior. It is also not, Carla, since you brought up the trigger journal, it is not a one-time journaling prompt. This is not a one-time thing. It's not a quick fix. It is also not a do-it-yourself substitute for therapy when things start getting heavy. So why do we need shadow work? Well, because shadows don't go away. We can repress them, we can shove them down, but they leak out. They really do. They leak out in strange places sometimes. They leak out in our relationships. They leak out in forms of self-sabotage. They leak out in the form of chronic stress, parenting issues, and yes, Kayla nailed it. Kayla knows exactly what story I'm going to tell, but we'll get there in just a second. And they leak out in burnout. So that's why we need shadow work, because if we are truly interested in growing and evolving, and that's one of my favorite words, evolving, if we are, and that's talking about internal evolving, not Darwin evolving. But if we are truly interested in doing that work and improving and learning to love ourselves and appreciate ourselves, because we can't really love and appreciate anyone else until we learn to love and appreciate ourselves, we got to do the shadow work. Because it's going to keep leaking. It's just going to keep leaking. So we need to do it to understand the unconscious stuff that is driving our behavior. And why we react instead of responding. So I pride myself very much on not losing my noodle in professional situations. So here we go, Kayla. And I'm going to keep this short because my stories are sometimes what makes these episodes long, but hopefully they help you apply something to yourself. Anyway, I pride myself on not ever losing my noodle in a public, especially a professional setting. And a year ago, April, I was in a professional setting that I've been in many times before, and I've been in very stressful situations associated with this setting and never really lost my noodle publicly. There were a couple times where I went into my hotel room and cried like a baby, may have even screamed a little bit, but never, ever, ever in front of anyone else. And in this particular case, somebody was aggravated with a situation and did not like how we were handling it. And they got very, very close to my face and they put their finger in it. And I literally lost like 30 seconds to a minute of time span. We talked about that rage, where I snapped back at this person and was not professional at all. I completely snapped at this person. I do not actually remember what I said. I had to ask people, oh my gosh, did I swear? I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I acted that way, even though I couldn't totally remember how I acted. Was it justified? Probably. Should I have done it? No. But I had to stop and think about why I reacted that way. And if you are a child of the 70s or 80s, more than likely you experienced a parent who frequently put their finger in your face when they were lecturing you, yelling at you, correcting you, whatever. And I have, although my personal space bubble, as I've Kayla, stop it. It was not great. Kayla actually was there and had to pull me away. Because yeah, I still don't know what I said. That's when I wish I had video so I would at least know what came out of my mouth. In any case, so I have always had a very big personal space bubble, especially when my anxiety was high. As I've learned to deal with my anxiety, my personal space bubble has gotten smaller. I hug people now, on purpose, not just because they're hugging me. But my face space is still fairly large. And this gentleman set it off. He just poked right in there and psh. So that was something I had to sit and think about. Why did I do that? And I have to work on not reacting to that in the future. My granddaughter was here yesterday and she was like right up here. And I'm like, okay, big face space bubble. Come on, back up a little bit. But I communicated. I didn't just lose it on her. So that's growth, right? Of course, it makes a difference when it's a child versus a grown person, but it's still growth. We're still going to call it growth. But this is obviously shadow work that I need to do because it leaked out, and it leaked out in my opinion, in one of the worst possible settings, because I have not had that kind of a public, reaction in a professional setting like that before. And it was important. So that is what I mean when I say we need to dig into the subconscious stuff that drives our behavior, and why we react instead of responding. So, also why certain people trigger us, and why we repeat patterns that we know aren't good for us, and why we're afraid of whatever we're afraid of. Insert your thing here, noun, verb, whatever. We're afraid sometimes of rest. I often am afraid of rest. We're afraid of failure. We might be afraid of success. True story. Love, fill in the blank, whatever stories you tell yourself that you can't do or that you can't handle, that you're not worthy, that you can't sustain a long-term relationship. A story I used to tell myself. These are all those shadows that are creeping out, hanging around. So the reason we need to do shadow work is so that we can heal old wounds with compassion. With compassion, not with judging, not with tearing down, but with compassion, so that we react less and reflect more and stop projecting our pain onto others and other situations, so that we can take ownership of our growth. All right, so now we know all about shadow work. How do we do it? How do we do it? Right? That's the big question today. We start with curiosity. We look into what's really going on, and we pay attention to certain recurring patterns that tell us a lot about ourselves. So I used to say, One of my favorite phrases was that actions speak louder than words. And that's absolutely true. Although it took me a little bit of time to actually separate words and actions and understand that sometimes, especially in my relationships, what I was seeing versus what I was being told were not the same thing, and that I needed to be paying attention to what I was seeing. However, what is greater than actions is patterns. And patterns tell us a lot about everything and everyone, including ourselves. So we need to pay attention to those patterns, those recurring patterns that consistently come up. We need to recognize them. We need to label them, identify the source, own them. And here's my favorite new thing that came up a few weeks ago when we were talking about, I don't remember the topic right now, but if you follow regularly, you'll remember me talking about naming it. The voice in our head, kind of the same thing. It's kind of like our shadow, that negative voice in our head. We said we needed to name it. We need to name these shadows, and we need to describe them so that we're aware of them and what they look like. For example, when I start acting jealous and taking things personally, a lot of times those things have nothing to do with me. It's because I'm feeling less than inside. This is something I recognize about myself now. It means I'm feeling guilty about something that I'm not doing. There's very little that I do that I feel guilty about. It's the things I'm not doing that I often feel guilty about. So that's, I lost my spot. I lost my spot in my notes, and I need my notes. That's what I mean by naming it and describing it. If we name it and we describe it, we are more apt to recognize it when it rears its ugly head, right? So how do we do this? Again, start with curiosity, start paying attention to those patterns. Journaling. Journaling is tremendous, whether you just take out a notebook or a journal, fancy journal book, whatever works for you, and you just spend a half an hour in the morning or in the evening scribbling about the day before, and all the things in it. That's very therapeutic. But what's more therapeutic, Carla, we talked about a trigger journal. I'm going to show you mine. It's right here. It's a notebook. It's just a notebook. I can buy like 50 notebooks for the price of one fancy journal. This is my trigger journal. It says trigger journal on it. And when I'm studying in school, or I have something come up like what happened that I told you about, where that gentleman poked his finger in my face, I write it down, and I write down the feelings that surround it. And then it kind of becomes a word association thing where I just start, it just kind of starts turning into a whole big long dissertation. And a lot of time the clues to why I reacted the way I did are in that long dissertation. And then I can start working on what the actual cause was. So journaling is fantastic. Things that you can journal are, what emotion do I try to avoid at all costs? For example, I could look into why it's not okay for me to lose my noodle professionally. Which most people would agree that's not the best idea. But, why do I feel like that? Why do I put myself under so much pressure? And how can I better handle those emotions when they come up in a professional setting? Which for most part I do pretty good, but apparently I did have a lapse. So things to write down in this journal. What was the first time I remember feeling that way? If I'm having a strong reaction, if you're having a strong reaction or a strong feeling, when was the first time you remember feeling that way? Another side of that prompt is, when was the last time I remember not feeling that way? If you remember, I have told you before about the first time that I went to counseling, my one marital counseling appointment before my divorce. And the counselor looked at me and said, "How long have you been depressed?" And I looked at him like he had 10 heads, and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said to me, "Let me reframe the question. When was the last time you remember being happy for more than a couple of weeks that didn't have to do with a specific event in your life?" And then the flood came. So literally the flood came. So when you're journaling and you're thinking about when was the first time you remember feeling that way in terms of a negative feeling, also think about, in terms of a positive feeling, when was the last time you felt that way that didn't pertain to a specific event? All right. So those are things to think about for journal prompts. What parts of myself do I hide or try to fix before others see them? That's another great one I need to dig into myself. So some other things, there's a game I found, not really a game, but a journaling game, if you will, that I found called Who I Am Not. And it kind of involves reverse brainstorming, which we talked about a year ago. List 5 positive qualities. You can do this in your journal. List 5 positive qualities you possess and then reverse brainstorm those qualities by identifying what the opposites are and what the associated behaviors look like for those opposites. So if I know I have a positive quality of problem solving, I just pulled that out of my ear. I might look at what the opposite of that looks like somebody that creates problems, somebody that creates drama, and what that behavior looks like. This is where the shadow work comes in, especially if you're working on you here. And then you reverse it again and identify the positive aspects of those negative behaviors and what those positive aspects are trying to accomplish, what you would say to them if you met them, and acknowledge what strengths are related to them. Now, that came from Psychology Today. It was a little bit strange for me, a little bit hard to follow, but essentially, when you're digging into these parts of yourself that you don't like, find out what the purpose of those were, what strengths were associated with that, and pull those out and say, okay, this is what this negative side of me produced that's positive and what I can work with and what I can accept. And then it might look something like, well, I was this way because of this, but this is what came out of it, and this is what I can integrate into myself now. So I'm sure that was a little confusing. Let me know if you need me to send you that link. But that's an interesting way of approaching the journaling. Some other things that you can talk about, that you can keep track of in a trigger journal or a shadow work journal or Carla's Negative Nancy journal or whatever you want to call it. I'm just using that because that's what you said, Carla. But here's some things to consider keeping track of when you're working on this journal. Your exaggerated responses to people or things. Your emotional outbursts that are too strong for a situation. Anytime you feel uncomfortable or upset at strangers or people you barely know. That's a good one. Anytime addictive behaviors, unexplained feelings such as you suddenly feel depressed, anxious, sad, or angry. You don't really understand why you're feeling that way. I've done that before. Why am I feeling this way? That is usually a flag that something is going on that I haven't addressed yet. Lingering moods that don't match how you feel kind of relates to what I just said. Things you do or say that hurt other people, and repetitive arguments or conflicts that keep coming up. So those are some great things. I will drop this link from WebMD into the comments when I'm done, because there's some great things there. There's some great suggestions for trigger journals, things to just, consider if you're going to keep a shadow work journal, or just start journaling in general. Trigger journal, word association, they all basically boil down to the same thing. When you start writing about the things that bother you, or even the things that make you feel joy, you're going to start associating that with memories, with other words, with other things, and you're going to learn a lot about yourself, I promise. Journaling is a huge part of this, but another great thing is talking it out. If you're not understanding why you're doing something you're doing, talk to a mentor, talk to a trusted friend. Seek therapy. Therapy isn't for broken people, it's for brave people, okay? You don't have to feel broken to go to therapy. And just because you go to therapy doesn't mean you're broken. And even if you feel broken, it doesn't mean you are. So therapy is not for broken people, it's for brave people. But if you specifically want to do shadow work, you want to maybe look for somebody that's trained in psychoanalysis, or somebody that's trained in Jungian psychology, that's trained in the principles of Carl Jung, which is largely to do with that shadow work and those inner drives. Now, a lot of counseling doesn't go that way anymore. They're strengths-based. They're now focused, present focused, and that's okay too. But if you are going to seek therapy specifically for shadow work, look for somebody that's had training in that department. Okay, so yes, talk it out. A mentor, a trusted friend. And when I say a trusted friend, we all have two kinds of friends in our lives, right? We have the kinds of friends that just agree with whatever we say to make us feel better. And we have the kinds of friends that call us out on our BS, right? That's the friend you want to talk to about this stuff. Not the one that's going to agree with whatever you say, but the one that's going to call you out if you're looking at something wrong. Gently and with love, but they're still going to call you out, okay? Because that's the relationship that's going to challenge you to think differently. The friends that agree with us all the time are great in certain situations, but if you're doing shadow work, that's not the friend you need to talk to. So I want to ask you this question before I wrap up. What's one trait you have felt ashamed of in the past, but now see as something that's to understand and not judge? And then what's something you do that you know you need to work on, that you could start that trigger or shadow work journal with? And then I want you to definitely take the time. I'm going to drop that WebMD article in the comments. Hey, Miss Billy, drop that WebMD article in the comments because that's worth digging into a little bit more. And what I gave you was pretty much an overview of it because we just don't have time for me to read the whole article, y'all. Okay. And then, so definitely, so that's what I'm going to ask you today. If you want to drop the answers in the comments, you can, or you can keep it to yourself, whatever works for you, whatever you're comfortable with. But what is one trait you felt ashamed of in the past, but you now see it as something that's to understand and not judge? And what is something you do now that you know you need to work on? Those are super important. Then make sure you check out that WebMD article. All right. So that's it for today. Here's what I'm going to leave you with. Okay. It's not about fixing yourself. Shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It is about reclaiming the pieces of you that get buried in shame, survival, or expectations. And those expectations can be other people's or your own. Lord knows I have set plenty of way too high expectations for myself. Shadow work doesn't make you someone new. It helps you to become who you really are without shame. Super important there. It took a long time to get here, y'all. This is that Rome was not built in a day. We did not get to this point in a day, and it is going to take time to correct. And the truth of the matter is this type of internal evolution is lifelong if we want to make it that way. And you guys know I'm of the opinion that when we stop growing and we stop evolving, we are now stagnant. Okay. So lifelong shadow work, it helps us evolve. The goal isn't perfection. It's awareness. Okay. We don't have to be perfect. That's a shadow that we often respond to. We don't have to be perfect, but awareness of what we're doing and why we're doing it, it is huge. It is absolutely huge. Yeah. Road rage. And I've done that before too, Miss Billy. So that's a great thing. That's a great place to start your shadow work journal, is with that road rage. I'd be curious to know what you come up with as you start writing about that. Maybe just write about an incident and how it made you feel and see where it goes from there. So remember, the goal isn't perfection. It's awareness. One last reminder, if you are watching this regularly because you are learning things that you are applying to yourself and they're helping you, guess what you're already doing? You're already doing shadow work and you didn't even know it. It's called self-improvement, self-help, self-empowerment. Like I said in the beginning, there's a ton of different names for it, whatever you want to call it. But if you're here and you're learning from what I'm talking about and you're finding ways to apply it to yourself and put it into practice, you're already doing it. And I'm already doing it. I'm learning from you every single time I go live. So that is it for today. If you found this helpful, please share. And if you're not comfortable dropping things in the comments, answering those questions in the comments, my inbox is open. Shoot me a message. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything that you're working on that I can help you with. And that's it. So go forth and conquer those shadows today. I'm not sure what I'm talking about next week, but you'll know as soon as I do. And until then, Happy Wednesday and be well.